All right, everyone. So today I wanted to share with you guys a new campaign farming method that I've been doing a lot of testing with. And the good news is it's going to be a lot easier to gear up for this campaign farming method. And it's going to be a lot easier to get the champions for this campaign farming method than the current methods that we kind of have going around right now. So I like to call this the double strike method, and you guys will find out pretty soon why I like to call it this. But I want to compare it to the currently known method that we have available right now. So if you guys watch videos or you know other people on YouTube or streamers or pretty much anybody who plays Raid who has a campaign farmer, I would say most of these people are going to have a champion that falls under this first category right here, and that is going to be the one-shot farming method. Now for this method, what you're going to do is you're going to take a champion and you're going to build them to have as much DPS as they possibly can. So you're going to want an incredibly high crit chance, preferably of course 100%. You're also going to want a lot of crit damage, and that's because crit damage is going to be the best stat that scales your damage. It's going to be better than just stacking a bunch of attack, for example. And what this is going to allow you to do on the proper champions is it's going to allow you to one-shot all of the enemies in the Brutal campaign. Now, of course, you're going to want to preferably also use this on an AoE champion, so instead of just killing one champion, they kill all the champions. But what you're going to do is you're going to kill everything before they get the opportunity to attack. Now, this is important because when it does come to campaign farming, what the problem is when you get to the late game is the amount of time that it ends up taking for the enemies to actually attack. It takes a lot of time, which is why one of the goals when it comes to building a campaign farmer, at least for the end game anyway, is to build farmers that can do everything before your opponents get an action, because that's going to save you a lot of time. Now, if you're in the early to mid game, it's not as big of a priority. Obviously, your number one priority should just be to stay alive, but definitely going to be the main priority for the end game players. So the problem with this one-shot farming method is that it is very gear intensive and very champion intensive. You need an absolute insane amount of good gear in order to do this properly. And it really is crazy how much crit damage and how much proper gear you need. If you don't have the proper gear, you're not going to be one-shotting all the monsters, and it's going to significantly increase the time of your campaign runs. So that's why I've been doing some experimenting around with this new method called the double strike method, and instead of revolving around entirely just a ton of crit chance and crit damage, now we don't really have to rely on that nearly as much, and we are going to go for high speed. Now there's a certain magic number that I've been doing some testing with, which is around the 220 number, and I'll show you guys some tests and some results around this. But essentially, what we are going to do now is instead of one-shotting everything, we're going to get two actions, because we're going to have enough speed to where not only do we act before our enemies act, but we're actually going to be able to act twice. So I want to actually show you guys what I mean by this, and I'm going to end up using Seeker as an example here just because he already has a bunch of my speed gear on him, and I don't want to pay the million or so crazy amount of silver to switch it to another champion. I'll do it with two champions actually, just so you guys can see. But I wanted to show you guys with all of my gear on him, and then I wanted to take a piece of gear off so you guys can get an idea of about how much speed it actually takes to do this. So let's just head in here with my Seeker here, who does have my speed gear. Alright. So I'm not actually going to complete this, but what I'm going to do is just show you guys. As you can see right here, all the champions, they don't even have half of their turn meter filled. So what I'm going to be able to do is I'm going to be able to act, and then what's going to happen is I'm going to be able to act again. So I get two full turns before my opponents get one turn. And as you can see, my enemies have right now about 85, 80 something percent of their turn meter filled. So I get even more than two full actions with my Seeker. Now, I have a bunch of crazy gear on right now. I know that a lot of people aren't going to have this crazy amount of speed, so I'm actually going to take off a piece of gear, and you guys will be able to see approximately how much speed you need in order to do this. So right then and there, my Seeker had 172 plus 103, which is 275 speed. Now I get it, that's a ridiculous amount of speed, especially if you're newer, you're not going to be able to get that kind of speed. But let's take off the boots entirely And you guys will see that even with the 220 or so speed that he has, he'll still be able to do this. So now, instead of 275 speed, I have 103 plus 118, which is going to be 221. So that is around 50 less speed than I had before. And 221 speed, still a lot, but now we're getting to the point where you're going to be able to more realistically be able to get this kind of speed on a champion, even if you don't have the most absolute insane gear. You could always end up farming speed gear in the 6th stage of the campaign as well. You can always farm it in the dragon. You don't need perfect speed gear in order to get 220-ish or so. So let's go back to the Brimstone path here. Let's go to stage 3 with my Seeker. He has that the boots taken off now, so he's got 221 speed. And as you guys will see, they are still not quite at 50% of their turn meter here. So a little bit less. We'll be able to take our action here. And then we still have our action. But now, as you guys can see, their turn meter is a bit closer to that 100% mark. So 220 is a lot closer to the number that you're going to need in order to be able to realistically accomplish this. If you go too much lower, what's going to happen is now you're not going to have enough speed, and one of the enemies is going to be able to act before you actually get your action twice. So then you kind of defeat the entire purpose of what this campaign farming method is. So having that benchmark of 220 plus speed is very, very important. If you have even 10, 15 less speed, then it really kind of defeats this entire campaign farming process. So let me put the boots back on this guy so I don't forget and realize why he's so weak when I end up using him again. So going back to the speed boots, and I want to show you guys what this looks like with an AoE farming champion, because obviously you're going to want to, whenever it comes to campaign farming, you're going to want to try to build it on an area of effect campaign farmer. Now, I know a lot of people like to build Relic Keeper as their first campaign farmer because he is a free Epic Fusion champion, and he's a decent starting Epic, but you're going to end up outgrowing him really quickly. And the reason is, even though his first skill is decent for campaign farming, it still only attacks one enemy. Yes, it grants an extra turn if the target is killed, so sure, you can end up essentially chaining your turns so that your enemies don't take turns, which is nice for campaign farming, but you're still only attacking one thing at once, which takes a lot of time. So in order to whack all your enemies individually, get to the end of a campaign stage, sure, you might not end up getting hit a lot, but it's still going to be very time-consuming, and you just end up outgrowing this guy once you do end up getting to the mid and the late game. So you are going to want to try to build your campaign farmer on an area of effect champion. Now, with that being said, though, it doesn't need to be anything super specific. Obviously, an important thing to note about campaign farmers is you want to try to have their skills all be area of effect if possible. This is why a lot of people like to use Basher as their campaign farmer. Is not Basher, sorry, Bellower. That's his name, not Basher. Because all of his skills are area of effect. Attacks all enemies, attacks all enemies, attacks all enemies. So it doesn't matter even if you use him on auto, he's always going to use a skill that attacks all enemies, so you don't have to worry about that. The problem with other champions that don't have all their skills as attack all enemies is when you do end up autoing on them, if you auto a skill that does not attack all enemies, you essentially waste that turn. Now you give your enemies an opportunity to act, and it slows down the campaign run. So I want to show you guys with enough speed. I'm going to use my Bad L just as an example so you can see what you're looking at closer to doing this with an area effect champion. Now, Bad L is also weak to the affinity of the campaign stage. Yeah, my Bad L has decent gear. Yes, it's a good champion, but again, I'm just using this as an example to show you the speed that you're going to be looking at and what this is going to look like with an area of effect champion. So we're looking at here, it's going to be about 250 speed, and I'm not going to auto him because, like I was just talking about, Bad L has a skill where if you auto, he actually doesn't use his AoE. He ends up using his continuous heal and his poison, which are not really going to be that good for the campaign. So if we start out here. Alright, so attack. We get another action, attack again. Now that time, because of course enemies are weak to this guy, he didn't kill everything, but with a proper champion with a decent area of effect, you don't need godly gear or anything really too crazy. As long as you have decent gear with that 220 speed, and of course you're not getting weak hits, then you should be able to use this method pretty effectively. So attack, we get another action, attack again. Of course, because they're weak, they get to not get killed, but that's fine just for an example here. And then attack and attack. Man, we really did get a lot of weak hits this one, though. That's actually a bit unusual. I don't usually get that many of them. All right, let's do this one more time, and I'm not going to stop. I'm just going to run it all the way through. See how long it ends up taking. Okay, so we're looking at around 20 or so seconds with the champion that has a weakness affinity. And I wanted to show you guys that example of the problem with his skill. One of his skills not actually attacking all enemies, and why you want to try to pick campaign farmers that have skills that don't necessarily essentially waste a turn, is what I'm trying to say. So when you do end up using him in auto, he uses his malice skill, which doesn't really provide as much usefulness specifically to campaign farming. It's a much better skill than his auto attack for things like the dungeon, because his poison is so good, obviously. But for campaign farming, not really going to be the absolute best. So it does slow things down a little bit. So very similar to the one-shot method, you are going to want to try to build your champions to have a decent amount of damage. So you want to be able to two-shot things instead of one-shotting them, and are going to want a decent amount of speed as well. 220 is that benchmark that you are looking for, but instead of needing an absolute crazy amount of DPS and crit chance and crit damage, now you only need a moderate amount, because you can two-shot them instead of one-shot them, and you kind of change that to needing speed instead. So it's definitely going to be a lot easier to gear using this method than it will be for the commonly known method, which is that one-shot method. Something else to note, very important. So, yeah, of course, similar to the one-shot farming, this works best with AoE champions, which I just showed you guys. Survivability shouldn't really be too much of an issue. You should be still killing your enemies before they get an opportunity to attack you. So you don't really need to worry about having to do this on an HP or a defense-based champion. And a couple takeaways as well is this method is going to be a bit easier to build and gear than that one-shot method, because once again, you don't need that insane amount of DPS, crit damage, crit chance, all that insanity in order to be able to one-shot stuff. Now, once you have that 220 or so speed benchmark, you can lower down your DPS gear because you can two-shot them. The downside to this, though, is it's a little bit slower. Now, if you do this properly, it shouldn't be that much slower. I'll still do some more testing. Maybe in a future video, I'll show you guys an example. I can switch over my gear to another champion. Maybe I'll end up doing this with some rares. But you should be able to easily get this down to, I would say, 11, 12, 13, 14 seconds with the proper gear. Even on rare champions, shouldn't really be an issue. But because you do have to attack twice, you do add a couple of extra animations to the battle, which slows it down a little bit. So that's the downside to this method. If you're still going for complete perfection, min-maxing to the extreme, then of course the one-shot farming method's probably still going to be better, but this definitely opens up the possibility to make a lot of very good campaign farmers for those of you guys who don't have godly gear or godly champions. So that's going to be everything that I'm going to fit into this video. Like I said, I might do a follow-up, maybe show you guys this method with some other champions, maybe showcase it on some rares, and that's going to end up being it for today. So I hope that you guys enjoyed this showcase of a new farming method. If you guys did, consider subscribing to the channel. Really appreciate all the support, everyone. Thank you once again. If you want to help out, tossing a like means more than you can imagine, so thank you to all of you guys who do that. And of course, more Raid Shadow Legends videos, guides, tutorials, and all that fun stuff should be popping up on the screen right about now as well. So feel free to check them out. But if not, until next time, this is Salt of the Salty Guild, signing out.